That fence comes down by Friday, or my crew takes it down for you, and you will be billed for the labor." That was Delia Pruitt, president of the Stonebridge Meadows Homeowners Association, standing at the end of my driveway in white sneakers that had never touched dirt, reading off a clipboard she held like a subpoena. The fence she wanted gone was 40 feet of cedar picket around my late wife's perennial garden. The one Margaret planted the first spring we owned the place. The one I had rebuilt by hand the autumn after she died. Delia called it a code violation. She called my corner lot, which sits at the mouth of the subdivision where her developer husband's new section was trying to push through, a community gateway parcel. What she did not know, standing there in the cold, with her crew idling behind her, was that I had spent 30 years in the wholesale plant trade. That I knew every grower and broker in 3 counties by their first names, and that the entire landscaping contract she was using to dress up her husband's model homes ran through a supply chain I understood better than anyone alive in that cul-de-sac. So when a woman with a clipboard tells you the garden your wife planted is now a community gateway, and that you will be billed for the privilege of keeping it, what do? I want you to sit with that. Because for a long time I did nothing but file paper. Then I bought the one thing she needed most, and I let her find out the slow way. My name is Hollis Ward. I was 63 the spring this started, a widower living on 2.5 acres at the corner of Meadow Run and Sumac Lane in a foothill town where the new subdivisions kept climbing toward the ridge. For 31 years, I had run plant material. Not a garden center, not a flower shop, but the layer underneath those. The wholesale broker who connects the growers in the valley to the nurseries and landscapers who sell to people like Delia Pruitt. I knew which farm grew the best boxwood, which one shorted you on root balls, which broker marked up a flat of annuals 300% and called it premium sourcing. I knew the difference between a specimen tree that had been root pruned properly for 4 seasons and a field-dug shortcut that would die in its second summer and look fine right up until it didn't. I knew the freight, the markup, the kickback, the handshake, all of it. I had retired 2 years before, sold my own little brokerage to a younger man who promptly ran it into the ground. But a man does not forget 30 years of phone numbers, and a man who built a reputation on never shorting a root ball does not lose it the day he hands over the keys. Margaret and I bought the corner lot in 1990. We were the 11th house on a gravel road back then, before the meadow behind us got platted and renamed and gated. She wanted the corner because the morning sun hit it square, and she had plans for that sun. I remember the day we signed. The old farmer who sold us the parcel, a man named Walt Sumac, walked the boundary with me before we ever talked price, and he stopped at each corner and put his boot on the iron pin the surveyor had set so I would know exactly where my ground ended. I have stood on those 4 pins more times than I can count since. A man who has felt the iron under his boot does not get talked out of his own property line by a brochure. Over the years, Margaret built a garden that people slowed their cars to look at. Peonies the size of dinner plates, the ones she divided every 3rd fall and gave away in coffee cans to anyone who admired them. A drift of black-eyed Susans she let go a little wild on purpose because she said a garden that was too tidy was a garden that had forgotten it was alive. There was a stone bench her father had cut, set under a serviceberry, where she took her coffee in the morning. And the fence, the cedar picket that I built around it the year the deer got bad and ate her tulips down to green stubs in a single June night. I milled the pickets myself, 40 of them, and set the posts 2 feet deep, and she painted nothing, because she wanted the cedar to go silver the way old wood does. When she got sick, the garden was the last thing she asked me to keep. She was in the chair by the window that looked out on it, near the end, and she did not ask me to keep the house or the truck or the savings. She asked me to keep the garden and the fence around it because the fence was the part I had made with my hands. I told her I would. I kept it. I keep my promises and I keep my records, and those two habits are the whole of this story. The Stonebridge Meadows HOA formed in 2016 when the developer carved the back meadow into 90 lots and needed a governing body to enforce the covenants. Here is the fact Delia never checked. My corner lot is not in Stonebridge Meadows. It never was. My deed, recorded in 1990, predates the subdivision by 26 years, and the plat map at the county shows my 2.5 acres carved out of the original Sumac farm parcel. Fee simple. No covenant attached. The HOA had jurisdiction over the 90 lots behind the gate. It had no more authority over my garden than the man at the toll booth has over your living room. I knew that the morning Delia handed me the first notice. The question was never whether I would win. The question was how long she would keep digging. Delia Pruitt had been president for 4 years by then. She drove a white luxury SUV with a vanity plate that read GRETEA. After a dog, I later learned not a grandmother. Her husband, Roy Pruitt, ran Pruitt Land and Build, the outfit developing the New Ridge section, and Roy had a problem. His model homes needed to show. A model home with bare dirt does not sell a $400,000 lot, and Roy had 3 models going up at the new entrance. The entrance that funneled right past my corner. My garden, my fence, my wild Susans did not match the manicured look the brochures promised. I was the first thing a buyer saw turning off the county road. To Delia, I was a staging problem dressed up as a code issue. The first notice came on a Tuesday in April. It cited my fence under a covenant article, Section 4, Paragraph 2, governing perimeter structures. I read it at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee going cold, and then I did the thing I have done after every escalation in my life, going back to my working years. I started a folder, a plain manila folder, labeled in pencil. Into it went the notice, a photograph of the fence, with that day's newspaper held up beside it for the date, and a 1-page memo in my own hand recording what Delia had said in the driveway, word for word, with the time, 10:40 in the morning, and the names of the 2 men idling in the truck behind her. That was incident 1. I wrote the number 1 in the corner of the memo and circled it. I did try the polite way first. I drove to the HOA office, a converted garage in the clubhouse by the gate, and I asked Delia civilly to show me the survey that placed my lot inside her association. She did not have one. She had a brochure. She had a rendering of the finished community with my corner colored green and labeled Gateway Green Space, as if a marketing artist's wish were a property line. I told her, level and quiet, that my deed predated her subdivision, and that she had no authority over my fence. She smiled the way people smile when they have decided not to hear you. "Mr. Ward," she said, "the parcel is functionally part of our jurisdiction. The gateway sets the tone for the entire community. We can do this cooperatively, or we can do it the other way." I went home and filed that too. Incident 2. I also did something Delia would not think to do for months. I drove to the county recorder's office and pulled a certified copy of my deed and the original plat, paid the $11, and put both in the folder behind the notices. Paper does not raise its voice. Paper just waits. The fines started in May. The HOA had no power to fine a non-member, but Delia did not let a small thing like authority slow her down. The notices came stapled to dollar amounts. $25 a day for the fence, then $50 when I did not pay, then a separate line item for what the letter called continued non-compliance with the aesthetic covenant. They arrived in cream envelopes, with the Stonebridge Meadows crest embossed on the flap, a little drawing of a stone bridge over water that did not exist anywhere in the subdivision. I came to know the sound of Delia's golf cart, winding up Meadow Run on delivery mornings, the little electric whine of it, and I learned to have the coffee made and the camera ready before she reached the box. One of those mornings she did not just leave the envelope. She got out of the cart in kitten heels that sank into the soft shoulder of the road, and she came up the drive to where I was standing with my mug, and she pointed her clipboard at the Susans like they had insulted her personally. "This," she said, "is exactly the problem. It looks abandoned. It looks like nobody cares. Buyers see this first, Mr. Ward, and it sets a tone. The community has standards, and the gateway has to reflect them." I told her the garden was 40 years old and had been here before her bridge. That wasn't a bridge. I told her, level, that she could keep mailing the envelopes, but I would not be paying for the privilege of keeping my wife's peonies. She told me the fines would compound. I told her I would file them. She did not understand that I meant it. Literally, by the middle of June, the paper total she claimed I owed was $975. I paid none of it. I photographed each notice, logged each one with the date and the time it arrived, and added them to the folder. Incidents 3 through 9, 1 per letter, each numbered and circled in the corner in pencil. I was not angry in the way she wanted me to be angry. The anger was there, banked down low, the way a coal bed holds heat under gray ash. On the surface, though, I was a man counting, and a man counting does not make mistakes the way a man shouting does. Around then I started to understand this was not really about my fence. One evening in June, a young man knocked on my door, nervous, holding his cap in his hands and turning it like a wheel. His name was Caleb Ortez, and he ran a crew for one of the landscape outfits, doing the model homes up the ridge. He had recognized my name on the mailbox. Years back, I had sourced the trees for the elementary school he attended, the row of red maples along the playground fence, and his uncle had worked one of the valley farms I bought from for 2 decades. He came to tell me something he thought I should know. "Mr. Ward," he said, standing on my porch step because he would not come all the way up, "they're making us file complaints on you, the office. They want us to put it in writing, that your property's hurting the new section, bringing the value down." He looked at his cap. "My boss says we lose the Pruitt contract if we don't. That contract's most of my year. I got 2 guys with families on that crew." He swallowed. "I didn't want to sign anything without telling you first. It didn't feel right." I gave Caleb a glass of iced tea and asked him to sit on the porch and tell me everything slowly. And I wrote it down on the legal pad I kept by the door. Not to use against him, to understand the shape of it. He told me how the orders flowed, who signed off, how the office talked about my corner like it was an empty lot waiting to be claimed. By the time he left, full dark coming on, I understood that Delia's overreach had a $sign behind it, that Roy's model homes were the engine, and that the whole pretty operation up the ridge depended on a steady flow of plant material, thousands of dollars a month in trees and shrubs and annuals. Flowing through brokers and growers I had known for 30 years, I did not say any of that to Caleb. I thanked him, told him to sign whatever he had to sign to keep his men fed, that nothing he put on paper could hurt a deed older than the subdivision, and I walked him to his truck. Then I stood in my driveway for a long while after his taillights were gone, looking at Margaret's peonies gone gray in the last of the light, and I let the shape of the thing finish forming in my mind. That was the night the idea found me. I want to be careful here, because I did not set out to ruin anyone. I set out to keep a fence. The truth is, I am a man who understands supply chains, the way Delia understood brochures, and I had begun to see exactly where the water came into her mill. The next week, the harassment widened. On a Thursday morning, a man in a polo shirt and a lanyard showed up at my fence with a clipboard and a digital camera, announcing himself as a code compliance inspector for the community. He had a laminated badge that looked like it had come out of a home printer, because it had. You could see the pixelation in the little seal, and the lamination had bubbled at one corner where the heat got it. He photographed my fence, my garden, my truck, and informed me that I had failed a compliance walkthrough. He used that phrase, compliance walkthrough, the way Delia used it, like a costume he had borrowed for the day. I asked to see his county credentials. He had none. He told me his authority came from the association. I asked him whose backyard he had walked through to inspect mine, since the only way onto my corner from the subdivision was across the Hendersons' lot. And he did not have an answer for that either. He was a man Delia had hired, a private contractor playing inspector at $60 or $70 an hour. And when I asked his name, he gave me only a first name, Greg, and then thought better of even that and refused it. I stood on my own land, on my side of my own fence, and let him take his pictures. There is a kind of patience that unsettles a bully more than shouting ever could, and I have a deep well of it. Then I took pictures of him taking pictures, with my phone, his bubbled badge, and his clipboard and his rental sedan, all in the frame, and I saved them to 2 drives that night, one in the house and one in the truck. The fake inspector, I underlined it twice. I called a deputy I knew slightly, Sam Boyd, who had grown up 2 roads over and bought tomato starts from a stand I used to supply. Sam came out on his lunch break, still in uniform, and stood at my fence eating a sandwich out of wax paper, while he looked at the printed badge in my photographs, and he exhaled slowly through his nose the way a man does when he sees a mess he cannot fix as fast as he would like. He told me the truth the way an honest officer does, which is to say, he told me the parts I did not want to hear, along with the parts I did. A filed complaint, he said, has to be logged and looked at, even a junk one, because the department cannot pick and choose which citizens to answer. The day it starts doing that is the day it stops being worth anything. He could not arrest a woman for being wrong about a property line. He could not make Delia read my deed. Then he said, and here he set the sandwich down on the rail and leaned on it, if I kept building the record the way I clearly already was, if I documented each false inspection, each fraudulent fine, each trespass, with dates and photographs and names, a pattern would form. And a pattern, he said, was a thing the county attorney could act on in a way that a single angry phone call never could. He said it would take time, and that it would test my patience, and that most people quit before the pattern was ripe. He said to keep counting. Then he said something I wrote down the moment he drove off, while it was still exact in my ear. He said the people who win these things are almost never the ones who shout loudest. They are the ones who still have the paperwork when everyone else has gone hoarse. So I kept counting. And quietly, in the evenings, after the light went off, Margaret's garden, I made some calls. The New Ridge section I knew was being planted on a tight schedule. 3 model homes, full landscape packages. With a grand opening, Roy had advertised in the regional paper for the 2nd Saturday in September. Behind the landscaper Caleb worked for stood a regional supply broker, a middleman who aggregated orders from the valley growers and marked them up to the contractors. That broker was a man named Errol Vance, and Errol Vance was 66 years old, tired, 2 years past wanting to retire, running a brokerage out of a metal building off the state highway with a phone that rang all day. I had known Errol for 28 years. We had bought and sold across each other 1,000 times. I knew his margins, I knew his customers, and I knew that for the last 3 seasons the single largest account on his books, the one keeping his lights on, was the steady Pruitt development order channeled through the contractors planting the ridge. I drove out to see Errol on a Monday. The metal building sat back off the state highway behind a gravel lot, full of empty pallets and a forklift, with a flat tire he had been meaning to fix for a decade. We sat in his cluttered office, where the walls were pinned with yellowed grower lists and a calendar from a seed company that had gone out of business years before, and we drank coffee bad enough to strip paint and talked about the old farms and the men who had run them, most of them gone now. We talked about Hap Dolan, who grew the best boxwood in the valley, and shook your hand like he was testing it for ripeness. We talked about the freeze in 2004 that took out half the ornamentals between here and the river. Errol's phone rang twice while we sat there, and both times he looked at it and let it go. And then I asked him, plainly, what it would take to buy his book. Not the metal building, not the trucks, the brokerage, the contracts, the grower relationships, the customer accounts, the whole quiet machine that moved plant material from the valley to the ridge. Errol set down his cup. He looked at me for a long moment, the way you look at a man you have known so long you can read his weather. And then he laughed, the relieved laugh of a man who has been waiting for someone to ask. "I'm 66, Hollis," he said. "My knees are gone. My wife wants to see the ocean before one of us can't. I have been trying to figure out how to close this place without leaving 40 growers and a dozen contractors high and dry. You walk in here and ask to buy it." He shook his head. "What took you so long?" He named a number. "It was fair." It was less than I expected, because a brokerage is only worth its relationships, and the relationships were really mine and his together, built over 30 years across the same valley. I told him I would sleep on it. I did not need to sleep on it. I had decided somewhere on the gravel between his door and my truck. A careful man does not show his hand at the table, and a careful man gives an old friend the dignity of thinking he drove a hard bargain. Within 3 weeks, the paperwork was done. I bought Errol Vance's brokerage outright with my own savings and the proceeds from selling off a piece of valley ground I had been sitting on for retirement. 8 acres of bottomland I had always meant to build a second life on and never had. The sale was clean, recorded, and utterly quiet. To the world and to Delia Pruitt, nothing had changed. The same metal building, the same phone number, the same trucks, with the same faded lettering on the doors. Errol stayed on for the season to ease the transition, glad to be free of the books, happy to keep answering the phone while I learned which accounts paid on time and which ones I would have to chase. What had changed was a single name on a deed of sale and a brokerage license filed with the state, both of which went into my folder, behind the certified plat and the fake inspector's photographs. The largest plant supply pipeline feeding Roy Pruitt's grand opening now ran through me. Delia had spent 5 months trying to remove my fence. She had not noticed me buying the ground beneath her husband's whole season. I did not turn off the tap. I want that understood, because it matters to how this ends. I am not a man who poisons a well to spite a frog in it. I filled every order on the books, on time, at the agreed price. Trees arrived, shrubs arrived. The ridge section greened up beautifully. I had no intention of sabotaging anyone's plants. The plants had never done anything to me. What I had bought was not a weapon. It was a seat at a table, and a clear and documented view of every transaction flowing between the valley and the Pruitt development. And a man with a clear view tends to see things other people have hidden. What I saw in the brokerage books I now owned was the second story under the first. Roy Pruitt's contractors were ordering plant material at volumes that did not match what was going into the ground. Invoices billed the development for premium specimen trees certified and tagged at premium prices, while the trucks delivered ordinary nursery stock at a fraction of the cost. The difference, thousands of dollars a month, was being written into the development's books as landscaping expense, and I came to understand, billed onward to the lot buyers and to a county beautification grant Roy had secured for the Gateway green space. The Gateway. My corner, the very green space Delia had been trying to manufacture by removing my fence, was a line item in a grant application, and the grant was being padded with plant invoices that did not match reality. I had not gone looking for fraud. I had gone looking for leverage over a fence. The fraud was just sitting in the ledgers I had bought, waiting for someone who knew how to read a packing slip. That summer, the escalation crossed a line it could not come back from. In late July, on a Saturday morning, a crew of 3 men I did not recognize pulled up to my corner with a flatbed and a pair of bolt cutters and began removing my fence. They had a work order signed by Delia Pruitt on HOA letterhead authorizing the removal of an unauthorized perimeter structure on a community parcel. My granddaughter was visiting that weekend. Sadie, 15, my daughter's girl, who had Margaret's way of moving through a garden, like she was greeting old friends. She had come up for the week because school was out and her mother was working doubles, and she had spent the morning deadheading. The spent peonies, the way her grandmother taught her, without ever meeting her, from a notebook Margaret left, and I had kept. Sadie was the one who saw them first, through the kitchen window, and came to get me with her voice tight and her hand on my sleeve. I walked out, coffee still in my hand, and I told the men, level and calm, that they were on private property, recorded in 1990, and that the work order in their hands was signed by a person with no authority over the land. They hesitated. I have noticed that men hired to do an ugly thing are often relieved to be given a reason to stop. Their foreman, a heavy-set man with a sunburned neck, called Delia. I could hear her voice come through the phone, sharp and certain, telling him the parcel was functionally part of their jurisdiction, and to finish the job and stop calling her about it. I did not raise my voice. I told Sadie to go back inside, and she did, and then she did exactly what her grandmother's granddaughter would do, which was lift her phone to the kitchen window and record everything, steady and quiet, the way I had taught her to hold a camera level the summer before. I called Sam Boyd. The crew got 8 feet of my fence down, 8 of the 40 pickets I had milled, before the foreman. Looking at my certified plat where I held it up flat against the truck window for him, and at his phone and at the camera in the window, made the smart choice. He told his men to load up. They drove off with 8 cedar pickets in the flatbed and a work order that would become the centerpiece of my folder. I picked one of the fallen pickets up off the grass and stood it against the gatepost, and I did not feel the anger spike the way you would think. I felt it settle, cold and clear, the way water goes still when you finally see the bottom. That one was different. That one was destruction of property, on a recorded deed, executed under a forged claim of authority, with a minor present. I had photographs, 2 video angles, the signed, work order, and a deputy's report filed within the hour. Delia Pruitt had finally, after months of my patience, handed me the clean criminal act that all the patients had been waiting for. Sam came out and took the report himself. He looked at the down pickets, at Sadie's video, at the work order, with Delia's signature. And he did not exhale slowly this time. He told me the county attorney would want all of it. He told me the pattern was now a case, and he told me, quietly, leaning on the truck the way he did, that I had built one of the cleanest records he had seen in 20 years on the job. I told him I had 30 years of practice. I did not tell him about the brokerage. That was a different ledger, and its time had not come yet. The grand opening was the second Saturday in September. Roy Pruitt had advertised it for weeks. The ribbon on the new ridge section, the gateway, the model homes with their premium specimen landscaping. The county was sending a representative because of the beautification grant. There would be a small dais, folding chairs, a banner, coffee, and urns. It was in every way a public and institutional moment, which is exactly the kind of moment a careful man waits for. I had no intention of disrupting a celebration. I intended to attend one as a member of the public, with a folder. 2 days before the grand opening, the conscience came forward, as it sometimes does. A woman named Pam Keller, who sat on the HOA board and had grown increasingly sick of what she had been signing, came to my door. She had heard, through the small-town way, news moves, that the county was looking at the fence removal. She brought with her copies of board emails in which Delia and Roy had discussed, in writing, the plan to manufacture a code record against my corner so they could absorb it into the gateway green space and roll it into the grant. Pam did not want money. She wanted, she said, to stop being part of it. I thanked her, made her tea, and put her emails in the folder behind the work order. I told her she should give the same copies to the county attorney, and she did. The next morning, on the second Saturday in September, I drove to the ridge in my good shirt. The dais was set up under the banner. Roy Pruitt was shaking hands. Delia stood beside him in a magenta blazer with a corsage pinned to it, presiding over the gateway she had built. The county grant representative, a calm woman named Linda Sun, stood near the dais with a folder of her own. I waited until the speeches were done, until Roy had thanked the community and praised the premium landscaping. And then I walked up to Linda Sun, introduced myself as the owner of the corner parcel, and asked if she had a few minutes. She did. I did not raise my voice. I have never had to. I laid 3 things on the folding table in front of her, one at a time, the way I learned to lay out plant material for a buyer, so that each thing answered the question the last one raised. First, my certified deed and the original plat, recorded in 1990, showing my corner was never part of Stonebridge Meadows, never a community parcel, never the gateway. Second, the signed work order authorizing the destruction of my fence, and Pam Keller's board emails laying out the plan to manufacture a record and fold my land into the grant. And third, the one Delia never saw coming. The brokerage invoices, the real packing slips beside the billed amounts showing the premium specimen trees that had been billed to the grant and delivered as ordinary stock. I told Linda Sun plainly that I owned the brokerage those invoices ran through and that I would be glad to provide the complete records. Linda Sun read the deed first. Then she read the work order. Then she read the invoices and the packing slips beside them, and her face changed in the way a professional's face changes when she realizes the celebration she came to bless is a crime scene with a banner over it. She asked me to wait. She made a call. Roy Pruitt was still shaking hands 40 feet away. Delia was still presiding. Neither of them knew yet that the ground had already given way under them, because the paperwork had won the case weeks before, quietly, in a metal building off the state highway, and a county recorder's office, and a manila folder labeled in pencil. The numbers told it the way numbers do. In 5.5 months, Delia Pruitt had issued against my fence a paper total of $2,450 in fines. The amount of that I had paid was zero, not $1, and the amount Roy Pruitt's development had overbilled to the county beautification grant for premium trees that arrived as ordinary stock. The records I now owned showed plainly came to $41,000 across the season. $2,450 against zero, $41,000 against the daylight. Anyone standing at that table could point to both and feel the distance between them. The consequences fell exactly where the overreach had pointed them. The county opened a grant fraud inquiry that afternoon. Linda's son did not give a speech and did not make a scene. She simply walked to the dais between the speeches and the coffee, said a few quiet words to Roy Pruitt, and watched his face do the thing a face does when a man realizes the floor is gone. The banner stayed up. The coffee stayed warm. Even so, the celebration was over, and everyone who mattered knew it within the hour. The beautification grant, the one that needed my corner to be a gateway, was the channel that carried Roy Pruitt's exposure straight to him, because the fraud lived in the grant, and the grant lived on my land, and my land had never been his to grant. The development's premium landscaping, claims unraveled invoice by invoice, all of it documented in the books I had bought from a tired man who just wanted to retire. Each billed specimen tree had a packing slip beside it now, and the packing slips did not lie. Roy lost the grant and faced repayment, and a referral that is still working its way through the courts. Delia, who had no authority to find, to inspect, or to remove anything, was removed herself, voted out by a board that had watched Pam Keller stand up. They held the vote in the converted garage by the gate, and Pam told me later that Delia kept saying the word jurisdiction right up until the count went against her, as if the word were a deed she could waive. It was not. She was named in the property damage complaint for the fence her own signature had authorized, the same signature she had pressed so hard into the work order that it tore the paper a little at the loop of the D. She lost the gateway. She lost the presidency. She lost the green space she tried to build out of my wife's garden. The fence she demanded come down by Friday is still standing. I never billed anyone for the labor. Caleb Ortez kept his crew and lost the Pruitt contract, which turned out to be the best thing that happened to his year because the honest contractors picked up the ridge work once the development changed hands, and Caleb does most of it now. He still buys his material through the brokerage, and he still calls me Mr. Ward, and I have stopped trying to get him to call me Hollis. I give him a fair price, and I never short him a root ball. Errol Vance got his retirement and took his wife to see the ocean, and he sends me a card every Christmas with a photograph of the two of them somewhere warm. Pam Keller sleeps fine. A week after the grand opening that wasn't, Sadie and I were out in Margaret's garden in the early morning, the way you are when the Susans are going wild and the peonies are done for the year. The dew was still on everything, and the serviceberry was dropping its last fruit on the stone bench her great-grandfather cut. She asked me if I had been scared those months, with the letters and the inspector and the men with the bolt cutters. I told her the truth, which is that I had been angry, banked down low and quiet the whole time, but never scared because I had the deed, and a man with the deed and the patience to wait has already won. He is just waiting for the paper to catch up to him. She thought about that for a while, the way she thinks, turning it over. Then she put her hand on the top rail of the cedar fence, the rail her great-grandmother's hands had never touched, but somehow seemed to the same rail I had stood the fallen picket against in July. And she said it was a good fence. I built it twice. It is still standing. Here is what I want you to take from this plainly, because the whole point of telling it is so you can use it. If someone with a clipboard tells you that the land your family built on is functionally theirs, do not argue with them in the driveway. Go to the county recorder and pull your deed and your plat, certified, for the price of a sandwich, and read where your line actually runs. Start a folder the first day and photograph everything with the date in the frame. When they send a fake inspector, photograph him too. When an honest neighbor or a tired old broker tells you something true, write it down and thank them. You do not win these fights by shouting. You win them by still holding the paperwork when the banner comes down. And if you ever get the chance to quietly buy the thing your adversary needs most, buy it. Fill every order honestly and simply let the record speak. If you have a story like this, a fence, a gate, a boundary, somebody tried to take, put it in the comments, because I read them. And so do the people fighting their own version right now. Subscribe if you want the next one, where a retired water engineer finds out the new HOA quietly rerouted a century-old irrigation easement to feed a private golf course. And the easement is recorded in his grandfather's hand. Keep your deeds where you can find them. I will see you on the next one.